I think we can have two, but it doesn't. I thought I might go to FCM if it's in Toronto. And I didn't go to AIM last time, and I don't know where it is this year.
First 3 years that after a while it became it's just the same kind of displays, the same things.
Oh, I did get quite a bit out of Roma last year. Where's Roma this year? Is it back in Toronto again?
Okay.
That was the 10th.
Yep.
The 10th. Yeah. For the. Yeah.
Okay, Mayor Penko,
Yeah.
I'm going to start this meeting.
10th and 20th.
Let's wrap it up.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the November 25th Committee of the Whole meeting. We do have regrets tonight from CAO Morris. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Hearing none, we'll move on. Any disclosure of monetary interest? None. We're delighted to have two delegations tonight. The first one is Dr. Barry Guppy, President and CEO of the Brockville-Smiths Falls Hospital. Welcome, Dr. Guppy, and please come on up and make your presentation. This is on behalf of the Core Capital Program.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak before Council today. And of course, we're going to be talking about the Core Capital Program. I know that this may be familiar to some of you, but I'm going to take the opportunity to go through some information that you may have seen before, just to help describe why we're here and why we're looking for your continued partnership. Before I begin, I just want to take a moment to introduce Lee Smith, who is behind me. She's the Executive Director of the Smiths Falls Community Hospital Foundation, who is an important partner for us in meeting our capital needs for the hospital. And Donna Howard is probably going to come in as well, who's the Chair of the Board. And we have a unique, I think we just need the slides on.
We won't take it out of your time allotment. We'll just,
Well, maybe I'll just carry on. Basically, what I want to talk to you about tonight is first going to just talk a little bit about the hospital, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how capital equipment and technology is funded in hospitals in Ontario, then tell you a bit about the Core Capital Program, which is why we're here, and then give you a sense of what some of the capital needs are of the hospital, what we're currently wanting to buy, and what our future plans are for purchasing capital equipment, and why your support is needed in this important undertaking. So the first thing is to really thank you for the leadership and partnership that you showed last year. Your contribution was significant, and really in our inaugural year of the program really set us on a great path forward. And so on behalf of the board, the staff, the medical staff, the whole hospital, we just want to make sure we pass that thanks back on to you again. And it's what we're going to be using this money to help make sure we're providing the highest quality of care in our hospital. So just a little bit about the hospital. I've put before you the mission and vision statement of the hospital. It's pretty important to us. It's an aspirational mission and vision. And even in the mission and vision, you can see core components of what the hospital really is all about. It's about providing high-quality care. It's built on collaborations and partnerships. And importantly, it's about providing exceptional care and exceptional patient care and family experience, every patient, every time. We also are guided by our strategic plan, and we're starting our third year of that. And embedded in that are a couple of pretty relevant objectives for the hospital. The first one is to implement a system of supportive technology. This is our health information system. We know that that's needed in order to help engage our patients and allow the movement of information across the care providers, which will improve the patient care and patient experience. Another priority is related to engagement. And that's a recognition, I think, when the plan was being developed in 2017 and 18, that the hospital was going to be facing some pretty significant capital funding issues, and that's why it became a strategic objective. That's, again, one of the reasons why we're here tonight. So this slide is really, one slide is trying to capture some relevant information about our hospital. It's still not projecting, but I think you folks have your slides. The hospital, as you know, is one of the few hospitals in Ontario that has an exemplary accreditation status, which is a pretty remarkable state for this hospital. It's a medium-sized hospital, and there's about 20 of that size hospital in Ontario. Our hospital serves about 60,000 people across 13 or so different municipalities. We are a single integrated hospital. We are one hospital that operates on two sites, and we have a site, as you know, also in Perth, and we provide a comprehensive range of inpatient, outpatient, and diagnostic services. Remarkably, and certainly in my experience, more services for a hospital this size than I would have expected, I think, which is a real credit to the nature of the comprehensive care that's attempted to be provided here. We are the sponsor of 3 community agencies, again, quite a unique feature. So Lanark County Support Services, Lanark County Mental Health, as well as Lanark County Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Program. On the right side of your slide, you'll see that just some facts about our budget. So our budget's around $62 million a year. We employ about 535 people, and importantly, about 92% of them are local. And we have a medical staff on the books of about 190 or so, about 40 of which are what we would consider full-time physicians who provide care on a daily basis within the hospital. So why are we here? We're here because, again, I know you probably know this, but the public is often very surprised to hear that the government, the ministry, does not provide funding for capital medical equipment. The expectation is, and has always been, that the community would be asked to support the purchase of such equipment. It's one of the reasons why we have hospital foundations and auxiliaries. In terms of when we look forward, as far as our capital needs goes, when we look 10 years ahead, we have about $31 million in need. At the present time, our foundations, through their hard work, and the auxiliaries through their hard work, raise about $1.2 million per year. And the hospital has been able to try to pull about $300,000 out of operations to try to, what we can spare, what we can pull out to help support capital purchases, which means that we're going to have an annual shortfall on average of about $1.6 million per year. So this is the reason why we've initiated the core capital program. It is an attempt, along with the ongoing support and partnership of our foundations and auxiliaries, which are doubling their efforts to try to help fill this gap, and the hospital's role in trying to do its part to continue to find efficiencies, chase new revenue opportunities so that we can contribute as much as we can. The core capital program was developed to help fill in that $1.6 million gap. There are three main areas that the core capital program will support. The biggest one is related to this hospital information system. I'm going to say a bit more about that in some detail, but it's probably one of the largest capital expenditures that we've had in many decades. The second part is to support the annual capital medical equipment. So every year, staff and the medical staff go through a process of identifying the medical equipment that they need, and any funding that we have in this program will also help support that. And also would help new and updated hospital equipment, so we have aspirations for an MRI in the future, replacement CT, and so on. These are big ticket items. This program is also to help support that as well. So on the next slide, what capital equipment will we be obtaining? We do have a ledger of all the capital equipment that we need to purchase over the next 10 years. There's about 150 major capital items on that list. And you're right, good man, thank you. And by major capital, for us, that definition of that is capital that's over $5,000. We have many other items that are under $5,000, but that list does not include other equipment that new physicians relocating to the area might ask for to help support their practice. So we now make it a regular part of our recruitment process that both myself and the Chief of Staff meet with any new physicians and ask, is there anything that you need in order to support the kind of practice that you want to have when you relocate to the area. As the community continues to grow, so will our clinical services need to grow, and that may bring on requirements for new equipment. The list doesn't include that. And although we try to plan our equipment needs based on expected lifespan, sometimes there's some unexpected failures, and we have to find funding to support that as well. So this is just a list of some of the larger items. As I said, there's over 150 items, but just gives you a sense of some of the kinds of equipment that we plan on purchasing in the time ahead. Largest, of course, being the hospital information system, which we'll talk about on the next slide. Just to give you a sense of some of the costs of some of this type of equipment, an MRI scan can cost up to $4 million. It also requires some facility renovations because it needs to contain a magnetic field. A CT scan can cost between $1 and $2 million. Ultrasound machines can cost $200,000. The mammography unit that we're currently raising money for will cost almost $300,000. And so you can start to get a sense of scale of the cost of these kinds of pieces of medical equipment. So this is, I just want to say a few words about the regional hospital information system. As I mentioned, this will be one of the largest purchases in the very, at least in the foreseeable past, that the hospital has undertaken. And it will replace a system that has been at the hospital since the 1990s. It is an essential component of a modern hospital. It's not just a computer system like you would see if you went to a PC and sat at a PC. This is a key tool that actually helps us monitor patient safety, standardize care, allow us to communicate easily with other healthcare providers, both locally and in the region, so that we can move their information in a secure way and help facilitate their care. The picture that you see on the slide is actually a picture we took from our health records department, and what we have right now is a hybrid between paper charts and electronic records. We will ultimately be moving to a full digital system that includes all of their imaging, lab results, and reports, and so on. A very critical piece of equipment to prepare us for the next many decades. So why should you support the Core Capital program? First one is that it's our local hospital. And it's in fact where the town of Smiths Falls is actually the largest utilizer of all of our health services compared to all the other municipalities that we serve. About 25% of all of our emergency department visits are from the folks of the town of Smiths Falls, and about 25% of all of our inpatient days, and about 20% of our day surgeries, of all the day surgeries performed, also come from this town. So it really is the town of Smiths Falls Hospital. But the more important reasons are that modern updated equipment is essential for the best patient and family experience, again, consistent with the hospital's mission and vision. We know that if we have the most up-to-date equipment, that we're going to be providing health services locally, that's going to avoid the necessity of patients having to travel to other centers and enter into even longer wait lists. And we also know that there's an intimate link between having the best and up-to-date equipment and physician recruitment and retention. We also know that this is also what helps support our hospital as part of a robust local economy. So I thought I'd just take two sort of sample case examples to try to make real medical equipment as part of this Core Capital program. And the first one is a piece of operating room equipment called the Hannah bed. And without the Hannah bed, we wouldn't be able to treat patients like the one that's being profiled here, just a 73-year-old man who has 2 years of intractable and progressive pain in his hip that needs to have a hip replacement. This particular piece of equipment that is situated at the Smiths Falls site allows the patient to be put in a certain position to have a special kind of hip replacement technique that's actually performed in very few centers because of its complexity. That wouldn't have been possible with this piece of equipment. And what would have usually been a 3-day hospital stay, many patients are discharged the same day or the next day because it allows for less muscle injury as they're undertaking the surgery. It's a critical piece of equipment that I can tell you is valued and appreciated every day by our orthopedic surgeon who uses that. The next slide is actually a picture of an old piece of equipment that we're in the process of fundraising to replace, and that's our mammography unit that's at the Perth site. The Perth and Smiths Falls Hospital is a hospital is part of the mammography screening program of Cancer Care Ontario, so against supporting women as they're undergoing screening and mammography that allows us to diagnose, biopsy, and potentially treat these patients locally. So it's time that we updated this piece of equipment to make sure that we're having the best imaging possible when we're treating folks in our community. So our request is once again coming before you. You recall that when you received a presentation last year, there was a formula that was used to help determine how we could potentially help share some of the costs across municipalities. The formula hasn't changed, and we will be making similar requests to other municipalities and have been making some requests to other municipalities across the area to make sure that we have the most successful program possible. So our request is of you for your consideration is exactly the same request as last year. We know you have many pressures, many requests from around the area, so we appreciated last year lifting us up as a priority, and we're once again asking if you would consider that in your deliberations once again. And with that, Chair, I'll just turn it over for any questions that folks may have.
Thank you, Dr. Guppy. Questions, comments? Mayor Panko.
Well, and welcome, Dr. Guppy. It's great to have you up here. You've been in part of our community for a number of months now, so it's great you finally had a chance to address council. Those who are on the Horseshoe are aware that this is, when we were here last year and we had the discussion about how critically important this is. I'm glad you've come here today to provide even greater clarity and understanding, and I think the HIS is something that probably doesn't resonate loud enough with most people, and I think the greater understanding helps people understand the value of that system, and especially also understanding the current system, I think, is 25 years old or somewhere around there. So, I mean, I don't think we have any computer systems in our operation, or anyone in the room or in the community probably has a computer from mid-1990s they're still using today. So, while we're blessed that it lasted this long, we know that it's severe limitations and probably also at risk of failure at some point in time. So, I mean, I supported this last year. I was an advocate for this last year. I continue to feel the same way. I think there's nothing more important to our constituents than their health care. And I think my experience being on the foundation and the hospital board gives me the understanding that if we don't provide the support municipally, things will have to change. And that's my fear, is that if we can't provide the equipment our medical professionals need, then they can't perform the procedures that our population needs. And so I guess if you could just, the question relates to not necessarily Plan B, but what would be the impact if you did not receive widespread municipal support? I mean, understanding the community still has to, the foundation still have to do probably more than they've been doing in the past. And so if the HIS is something that's coming no matter what, if there isn't the money there to help with that, what's the potential impact on operations?
So I think there's potentially two groups of impacts. One would be we may have to make decisions about other equipment that we might forego in order to support some of the higher priority items. But the second is we may have to take on additional long-term debt in order to, now we're already in extremely, one of the leanest hospitals in Ontario. We want to continue to be able to generate from operations our part to help support. That would compromise our ability to potentially do that. So it would mean some hard choices. We would potentially have to increase our current long-term debt in order to support some of the larger pieces of equipment we need. Would probably be the more likely outcome.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Allen?
No, I don't have a question, but I fully support what the mayor's just said as well. As a former user of the hospital and surgery done that was incredible, and it's close to home. I mean, there's nothing as important as the hospital to a community, and the fact that we've had it in our community, I think helps a great deal. A lot of the seniors who are having hip replacements and other surgeries don't have to travel, and that's a big factor in their getting better, I believe. So anyway, thank you for coming, and I certainly support this ask.
Councillor Brennan?
Thank you, Doctor, for the presentation. And you'll know that the municipality of Smith Falls has a tradition of supporting the hospital, i.e. the redevelopment. I think the municipality contributed about $800,000 to that, because we realize the importance of the institution to their people. And I like the line in your presentation. It is linked to economic development for people thinking of moving here, when you can tell them that you can have a hip done and go home the same day. And by the way, I know a gentleman last year that had two done the same day and went home that day. And so I thought it was a miracle when he told me, but because he was walking around about 3 weeks later with no noticeable. So anyway, that, it's fantastic. What we have to do as a council is figure out how we're gonna do this. But that's our problem in terms of our budget and that sort of thing. But for me, it's a no-brainer for support. So thanks for coming.
Councillor Dwyer?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Guppy, for coming tonight. The presentation was informative. And the piece that really struck me was the note you made about the importance of equipment requests by new physicians. Do you find that that's kind of status quo whenever a new physician is recruited to the community, that the expectation is that equipment will be made available by the hospital for their practice or research interests? Like this is something that's standard now?
It depends. It's a bit unique to the specialty of the physician, for sure. Some physicians would have greater equipment need than others, but absolutely, I would say that actually informs whether they even look at a community or not. You know, my specialty is neurology. I wouldn't, if I was practicing neurology today, I wouldn't go to a place that didn't have an MRI and a CT and electrophysiology. I'd go someplace else.
Right.
So I think, many of, particularly specialties, they have high equipment demands because they're often very procedural or diagnostically oriented. But when they look at us, we want to give them the assurance that we're willing to respond or able to respond to the capital equipments that they need in order to make sure they're practicing in the way that they were trained and in the way that they want to continue to practice as part of their, their ongoing work in the community.
Okay, and through the chair, just a follow-up question. I mean, it's lovely that you've joined our staff here and have background as a neurologist, but I would assume that the majority of doctors that we're recruiting would not have a neurology background because we would not be able to offer the types of facilities that they would be interested in. What type of doctors do we see that could potentially be relocating here, and what would their equipment expectations be?
So certainly, so as you know, we're actively recruiting for internists, and very much so actively recruiting for family doctors. But family doctors also want to make sure. I mean, a lot of the equipment that you saw on the list are actually diagnostic equipment, and so they want to have an assurance that their patients can access the equipment, and then with the power of the HIS, they're able to get those results almost immediately, and helps facilitate patient care. So. I think from family doctors, they have similar, even that's the principal group that we're actively recruiting right now, but they want to make sure that they have the equipment locally to support seamless and rapid care for their patients. They don't want patients to have to drive if they can avoid it to Ottawa or Kingston to get something that we can do here and facilitate their care pathway.
Thank you. Councillor Alford.
Thank you. Good to see you again, Dr. Guppy, and thanks for coming. I don't think anyone doubts the value that the hospital adds to Smiths Falls. I did have a question with regard to the 13 municipalities that you mentioned. Last year, Smiths Falls gave what was asked of us. How did you fare out over the 13 municipalities?
So our target was to fundraise for $1.1 million last year, hoping that we would fill in the other $500,000 between the hospital and the work of the foundations. We had participation from the County of Lanark, Tay Valley Township, Town of Perth, Town of Smiths Falls, and the Township of Rideau Valley made a multi-year commitment that begins in the next year. So for an inaugural year, we're pretty pleased with that outcome. The goal obviously is to have a broader participation of the municipalities that we're served, and we're wanting to engage each of them on their own terms because they have different questions, they have different issues that they want to ask about. We want to make sure that we are able to respond to that.
So, and maybe I missed it, so how close did you get to the 1.6?
So in total we raised $490,000 last year.
And certainly didn't get the participation of all 13 municipalities, but you're going to go back on the road again.
Absolutely.
To try again.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions. Just make a couple of comments on the question, Dr. Guppy, and I welcome Donna Howard, the chair of the board. Nice to have you. No, that's fine. It's great to have you, as always. I know that we have an excellent hospital here in Smiths Falls and Perth, and providing very good care when you're ill or when you're having a baby or et cetera. I just want to remind the public and council that we also invest in health promotion. I think when you look at our community grants to small, emerging, that add value and a robust dynamic to our community, I think we're spending about $140,000 on community grants. And then we also contribute a share of the public health. So some of you heard this on Friday. So municipalities are in the healthcare game, both funding and in some cases through the upper tier indirect service delivery. So we're in this business, and so for the public to understand, I think to the tune across Ontario about over $2 billion, municipalities are directly investing in healthcare through programs like this one. So we're in this business. What I think the challenge for us and through our association, Municipalities of Ontario, is to develop some policy framework or some guidance as opposed to each year having the hospital come forward. It's a one-off, we debate it. I think if we could find some way to say, if we're in this business, what's the best way to manage these kind of asks? Because you've heard that the Kingston Health Science Center is coming forward as well, looking for resources. And so we're trying to find, definitely supportive of our local hospital, and you've heard that support around here. But I think going forward, we're going to need, as a municipality and together with what is the role on an ongoing basis? Because when we had local health integration networks, LINs, municipalities weren't represented there, and yet we're a key contributor to the funding. So I think the policy paper coming out of the association is saying, how do municipalities have a voice? We're paying our way. How do we have a stronger voice in the direction of the way healthcare is going? So I just want to set some of the context that we're faced with in these changing times. By the way, that $2.1 billion is up 38% since 2011. So the asks coming from both hospitals and other healthcare organizations is going up rapidly, probably much more rapidly than the revenue that the municipalities are seeing. So we're going to have to make sense of that going forward. I thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it, and I know that the request, as you've heard a lot of support here tonight, will be taken very seriously as we finalize our 2020 budget.
Great. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So we're going to move to our next delegation. I'd like to welcome David Sompe and Kevin Kluche from Planet Youth Lanark County. And speaking of health and promoting good health, I think these guys will fit right in on that conversation. Just make sure that your little red button's on.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this is Kevin Kluche. Yeah.
Good evening. It's wonderful to be here, and we appreciate very much the opportunity to be able to speak with you. Whoops.
Maybe I can do it.
Maybe you can do it. There we are.
There you go.
Oh, thank you.
Go ahead.
As Peter mentioned, we are here this evening to speak with you about Planet Youth Lanark County and to provide you with some updated information or perhaps new information if you are not familiar with this project. We just want to provide you with a bit of a context to hear the story that we're going to share with you this evening. And the context that we want to provide is to speak with you about seeking your support, seeking your ongoing engagement with this community-based youth wellness program that is about creating change at a community level to deliver an opportunity for youth to grow up in a healthy community and to make positive health-giving choices for themselves. So the way we would like to ask you to participate going forward is that we do have some workshops upcoming that are planned with the Icelandic Center for Social Research regarding some questionnaires that will be described in a few minutes that will be delivered to grade 10 students across Lanark County and the town of Smiths Falls. And we also would ask you to partner within some public meetings and media events that will broadly communicate the story of Planet Youth Lanark County going forward. So with that as a context, we just want to share with you that Planet Youth is an opportunity that has come from a lot of work that's been done over 2 decades in Iceland, and it has been exported and in fact sought after by a number of communities in the European Union, Africa, South America, and now North America. And quite coincidentally, Dr. Tam, the Chief Public Health Officer for Canada, noted that it's really important for communities and all levels of government to participate in programming that's going to create that safe and health-giving context for youth growing up in our country today. And that it's really important for health to focus on prevention, as well as harm reduction, treatment, and justice responses. So this really focuses on the prevention mandate with regard to the kinds of work that is done in terms of preventing problematic substance use. And as the founding director of the Center for Social Research and Analysis, Inga Dora, has stated, it's looking for opportunities to be able to provide the option for youth to make the choice for health. If we create the social context that allows for them to make good choices, they will, because they want life to be good, they want life to be fun, like everyone else within our communities. And the intention is that if we work with our communities, we can create those opportunities so that they can make choices for themselves that are healthy and that they are going to provide for an opportunity for them to raise children in turn in the next generation who are going to make good choices. You see, adolescents are social products. They grow up within our social environment, within the community in which they live. They respond to municipal policy as well as provincial and national policy. And if we're able to create opportunities that provide policy, perhaps invisible to the youth themselves, however, that also provide opportunity for them to choose to engage in recreation, choose to engage in the arts, choose to engage in opportunities for attachment in positive ways with regard to community engagement and political engagement, they'll opt for those. If on the alternative, we don't provide them with the opportunity, they'll find their own way to make choices that are not necessarily as health-giving for themselves. So we have a higher probability of success by working with the social context than if we try to change the behavior of the individual person, which is notoriously challenging and difficult. And if we look at the experience in Iceland over the last 20 years or so, when you look at being drunk in the last 30 days, smoking, and having used cannabis, you can see the rates have gone in 1997-98, which was the worst reporting within the EU, to by 2017 the most positive reporting in terms of the kinds of experiences of substance use across their country. And it's that kind of initiative that we have been working with in Lanark and Smiths Falls over the past 18 months or so. David?
Thank you very much, Kevin. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an outline of what this methodology is about, and then talk about our plans for bringing this methodology to our region. And I'm really proud to say that we're the first community in Canada that is adopting this methodology. As Kevin said, it's been proven in other countries, but we're the first one in Canada. So I think I'm really proud of that. So it's an evidence-based practice, and the evidence is gathered from surveys of grade 10 students. Those surveys are constructed based on the experience that the folks in Iceland have gathered over the last 20 years. And so they're able to identify through those survey questions the presence of risk and protective factors that exist within a particular community. About 8 weeks after the survey is conducted, each community will get a report. So there'll be a report, in our plan, there'll be a report that comes to Smiths Falls, there'll be a report that comes to Carleton Place where I live, there'll be, for every one of the municipalities around the area will get its own report. And that report is each school in which a survey is conducted will also get a report. So that report provides an opportunity for reflection at the community level. What are we learning from this report? What does this tell us about what's going on in our community, about protective factors, which are good things, which we want to strengthen, we want to make more robust, and about risk factors that we would want to potentially look for ways to address and dampen down. Some of the interventions that will allow us to make positive change in our community are ones which will rest. The responsibility will, I think, or I expect we're going to find, will rest with individual parents or groups of parents or neighborhoods. But some of those may also rest with the community. We already know that, as Peter said, that you're investing in health in a number of ways, and you've got great facilities, recreational facilities, there's arts facilities in this community. I think you've done really wonderful things here. This kind of methodology we're talking about, we're conducting these surveys, receiving these reports, will allow us over time to develop a dashboard to measure about whether we're making an impact or not. And that's the thing that really attracted me about this methodology. You saw on the previous slide some of the results that they've been tracking in Iceland. What they didn't show in there is that the mayor of Reykjavik is on record as saying the reason why Iceland made it to the World Cup a few years ago is because of this program. There's lots of ways of measuring things, but it's really important to me that there is a way of measuring. We heard a great presentation from the hospital here a little while ago. Some of you will know that I've been involved on boards of hospitals for a while. I was a chair in Carleton Place. I'm on the board of the Royal now. And one of the things that's always, I would say, frustrated me is that there wasn't necessarily an opportunity to measure about whether some of these things we were investing in was making a difference. We have a way of measuring here at the community level, and I'm really excited by that. So as each community gets its report, 8 weeks, I said 8 weeks, not 2 years like the surveys that happen right now where, student use drug surveys. It takes a year or two, and they're kind of coarse sampling. It's really hard to develop interventions and then measure about whether you're making an impact. We'll get these reports 8 weeks after the survey. It'll be in time for your council or your community to consider what's going on and then to develop plans for interventions perhaps in the next fiscal year. So I'll give you a little bit of background of what our community is. It's a community-led initiative. But we've got really strong support. I'm very pleased to report that we have both school boards, the Catholic District School Board of Eastern Ontario and the Upper Canada District School Board engaged with us. So we've got permission, if you will, to conduct the surveys through them, which is a really important part of what we're doing. The health unit has been tremendously supportive of what we're doing, just like the health unit has been very supportive of the Municipal Drug Strategy Network, which has existed in Lanark County and the town of Smiths Falls for 10 years. Kevin is here as the chair of that Municipal Drug Strategy Network. He's also, as I'm sure you know, executive director of Open Doors. The United Way of East Ontario is acting as a fundraiser because it costs money to do the diagnostic, and we're not here today asking you for money. That's maybe another year, but not today. We're asking you to participate with us, but we are taking on the responsibility of raising the money to do that, and the United Way is helping us in doing that, and they're going to be providing our back office, if you will, administrative support as well. We've got youth-focused organizations sitting at our steering committee table. I mentioned the municipal drug strategy, and we also have police represented. So it's a pretty broad category. In addition, we've got and I shouldn't say just, we've got community members. I'm there as a community member. So as I said earlier, our status is we're the first in Canada. We have signed a service agreement with the Icelandic Centre for Social Research and Analysis. So this is a not-for-profit organization that's out of the School of Public Health in Reykjavik, whose purpose is to help communities do this. We've actually also got a research engagement with the Public Health Agency of Canada to measure our effectiveness in adopting this methodology in the Canadian context. You saw earlier that Dr. Tam has put out a call last year for communities to get involved in these kinds of things, and I'm really pleased that the Public Health Agency is supporting that. So they're actually funding the development of a formal evaluation framework. So we are going to measure what impact we're having, and that framework for doing that measurement is going to be made available to other communities in Canada. And we've got our collaboration ongoing going with the two school boards. This is an example of a cover page from a report that was recently released in around Galway in Ireland. And it's hard to see on this slide, but there's some interesting things that happened here. They found that there's a particular group that were more likely to be drunk if they were involved in a particular sports activity. These are not the kinds of correlations you necessarily expect nor want to see. And I know I've heard when the folks from Iceland talk about, they found a similar result in, I think it was Estonia, where they found that there was a higher probability that a certain group of young men would you be using drugs if they were involved in a particular sports club. That happened to be bodybuilding, and there it was steroids. That was kind of the gateway that was taking them there. So there are things that happen that you find, and of course in Ireland, I'm sure they're going to be looking for that, what was happening there. So you'll get a report that looks something like this. This is the cover page. There'll be lots of detail in there that will come to you next spring. So once again, our ask is twofold. We are going to be having a workshop. It's looking like it's going to be the 21st of January, location to be determined. That workshop is going to have 3 parts to it. The first part is going to be the folks from the Icelandic Center are going to be helping us work with the people who are going to be administering the survey, so we do the data gathering correctly, and so there's a working group that's set up with the school boards to talk about that. Another part of it will be for getting folks who are going to be receiving the reports to, okay, here's what's going to be happening, here's how to get prepared to receive those reports. So there's a learning opportunity there, so we're hoping we'll have people there. And then the third part is we're going to have a public meeting that night to just kind of try to get the message out again about what we're doing, because it's really important that we get strong participation from the students who are being surveyed. And one of the questions we often get is, why are you surveying grade 10s? Because we're not going to be making many changes that are going to impact those grade 10s. As Kevin said, it's really hard to change behaviors once they're ingrained. But those grade 10s are going to tell us about sort of the integration of all their experience up until grade 10. So we'll learn some things. I would imagine that a lot of the interventions are going to be targeted at younger people, although there may be some that are also targeted at that age cohort. But it's really important that we get strong participation from those, partly because of the statistical validity of it, but more importantly because if you get a report back and it's low participation rate, it's easy for parents to say, it was not my kid. It was 2 years ago, or only 20% answered, so it's not my kid. But if we can say, no, it was 8 weeks ago, and 80% or more than 80% of the grade 10 students answered, it is your kid. It is telling you about what your kid has experienced and what the younger people growing up are going to be experiencing. So that's why we're starting this campaign of getting the news out there so that we will have strong participation in the surveys. And so that's our ask. We're looking for your support. And in communities that have active municipal drug strategy committees, we're assuming that those committees will be receiving the report on behalf of the community. I guess one of the asks is where you would like the report to come for Smiths Falls. And the other thing I should say before we turn it over for questions is, as those reports become available, we are going to have resource who's going to be available to help your committee, whoever you're delegating to review the report. There'll be support from the folks in Iceland, plus we're going to be hiring somebody on a contract basis ourselves who will be a domain expert, so they can kind of walk through and say, here's the kinds of things that have happened in other communities, you might want to consider these.
Thank you very much, David and Kevin. Questions from my colleagues? Councillor McGuire?
Thank you for coming, David and Kevin. I was lucky enough to be at the meeting in Carlton Place a while ago now, where they had the doctor from Iceland that's working in Virginia, and it was exciting because it's the optimism in the room from when you take the status quo and you turn it on its head and you say, this isn't the way it needs to be. This cultural stuff is something that can be shifted, pushed in a different direction. And when you get something this, it's a game changer. And when you get something this big, I think it's easy to say, oh, well, that would never work here. It might work in Europe. It might work in Iceland. It might work in Virginia. But it's a gimmick. It probably wouldn't work here. And I think what you guys are proving is it's not a gimmick. It's an academic exercise. It's a very monitored process of figuring out what's going to work here, what's not going to work here, what the status quo is, and it's going to give us quantitative quantitative evidence on how we're improving or getting worse or status quo. So I'm really excited to have you here tonight. It was a great presentation. Your hope is contagious, and I hope that, we get strong participation for these events, because it's a pretty small ask for such an important program. Thank you.
Mayor Panko?
Yeah, no questions, gentlemen, just a comment. I mean, it seems like a fascinating program, and the results are profound. I mean, to see that much of a difference in that time frame is unbelievable. So, again, as Councilor McGuire said, I think you're probably pretty widespread support here. I think we're a group that's wanting to do whatever we can to support the youth of our community, not just today, but for decades to come. And this initiative being so unique to Canada, we're just blessed to have it, and blessed to have you gentlemen leading the way. So hopefully we're all available, or most of us were available in January to participate. Thank you.
Councillor Allen.
Yes, I sit on the Municipal Drug Strategy Committee on behalf of council, and we've earmarked some of our money. We get budget money every year, and we're earmarking that to be able to access the right thing when we find out what our community students need. We're already working in the high schools with our community officer, and we do a number of different events in the year that, that have to do with drugs and now cannabis in particular. But no, I'm really happy to hear what you said tonight, because at our last meeting, the question really was what's going to happen next? When is this going to proceed? So you've given me some answers that I can take back to the committee Wednesday.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Councillor Alford.
Thank you, both gentlemen, and I hope that that we have 2 student counselors that can also join us in January, because I think their input's going to be wonderfully valuable as well.
It's wonderful to see them at the...
Thank you both very much. I'll just make a brief comment. As you know, the town of Smiths Falls and the region has benefited from the legalization of cannabis in a great way. But we also take our responsibility. It's of not only do we want to diminish the role that the illicit market plays through the legalization, but the other key pillar of that is to make sure that the youth are not starting cannabis use. So the town, although it is a cannabis-friendly community, we also take our role very seriously in preventing youth from engaging in cannabis before they're ready and before they're adults. So I think our participation would send a strong signal, particularly from our community, that this is a really important endeavor, and we're seeing the benefits, but we have this obligation to take a very strong stance in making sure that we're preventing the use of cannabis in young people, as well as the main drug, which is alcohol, of course.
Yeah, if I may just make one more comment, is that when I'm in discussions with the folks from Iceland, we don't talk a lot about, the tell people not to do this, tell people not to do that. That's not what this is about. This is about making it an environment where any choice that a young person has in front of them is more likely to be a good choice. That's what this is about. So this is not about just say no. That's not, that kind of stuff doesn't work. This is about as Kevin said earlier, is about creating this kind of environment where young people grow up healthy. Yeah. And I'm really excited by it. I'm really pumped by it. And I've got a grandchild who's going to be growing up. He's just 2 years old, and I'm hoping by the time he's 5 years old, he's going to start seeing these kinds of things happening in his community too. I think it's just what we owe to our young people.
Yeah, I think it's in the title, the community development is really what it's about. So.
Exactly.
So thank you both for coming. We will put this on an agenda of council, and so I'm hearing seems to be a consensus, a lot of nodding for our participation both in January, if it's as simple as that, as well as going forward how we can participate in promoting the initiative.
Including with your colleagues at County Council, please.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we're moving right along. Adoption of the minutes. Are we doing them as a group?
Yes.
So a motion to approve October 28th, November 12th, November 13th, and November 18th. Moved by Councillor Dwyer, seconded by Councillor Brennan. Any comments, questions? All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. We have 3 directors' reports. Jennifer Miller's going to start us off, please.
Thank you. So Smiths Falls has been well represented provincially over the last 2 months, and I just wanted to share some information with you about that. At the Tourism Summit in Blue Mountain in late October, it was hosted by the Tourism Industry Association of Ontario. A number of Smiths Falls businesses were involved. The week started with a one-day cannabis conference, and the town of Smiths Falls was one of the sponsors of the event, with Becky Allen sharing our cannabis tourism strategy. Nate Morris from Canada's Cannabis Project was the keynote speaker, along with Emily Halverson, a subject matter expert from Canopy Growth. Brian Paquette from Axe and Arrow has launched a new cannabis catering company, Infusium Kitchen, and he did a cooking demonstration. So Smiths Falls was on the menu that day. Will Spencer from R&D Bakery spoke at the local food conference in Cornwall at the beginning of November and highlighted his great work that his bakery in Smiths Falls is doing. His bakery, which is run out of the Gallipo Center, uses oats to make bagels, and he's actively working to expand. Our own Becky Allen joined the RTO 11 Board of Directors this fall. For those of you that don't know, an RTO is a regional tourism organization. There's 13 in Ontario. They're set up as not-for-profits that support and lead tourism marketing efforts for their regions. And having Becky at their table helps promote our community in our region. And finally, in order to continue to build on our own tourism product offerings, we have secured 2 seats for developing tourism businesses to attend an experiential tourism implementation workshop. This hands-on workshop is by invitation only to identified businesses that have an experiential tourism product that will be ready to take to market in the next few months. And so we are happy to have 2 such businesses ready to take this next step, and we hope to see them launch here in Smiths Falls this spring.
Questions or comments? Thank you very much. Director Manhire, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 3 quick project updates. The pedestrian bridges are due to be delivered to town tomorrow. They will be installed tomorrow and Wednesday. Thursday, we will be constructing the ramp, so they should be available for public use if all goes well and Mother Nature cooperates by the weekend. The other one is the Festival of Lights kind of kicked off this past weekend down at the park, and I would encourage all of you to go down and take a look. Staff did a great job with setting up, and we have a number of corporate sponsors that have kicked in with that project as well, so very interested in getting those some exposure. The other is Town Hall. We did remove the old sea can that was used for storage in the back. We will be constructing the overflow parking in the park over the next couple of days, and hope to proceed with the rest of the project in the coming weeks.
Any questions? Councillor Allen.
Yeah, we had the pleasure of driving around Centennial Park last night. It's beautiful, so I congratulate the move. I think it's a great one. The other thing, I noticed on Facebook, I think you were talking about how people can do a sponsorship there. Could you explain it for the camera, just so that people at home that aren't on Facebook might understand it?
What we've done is we've reached out to local businesses to sponsor a tree or decoration. Those trees are then going to be made available to people in the community who can take those home at Christmas time.
But they don't have to decorate it, was my understanding.
No, that's correct. It comes kind of with all those decorations. And if anybody is interested, they can certainly reach out to the Recreation Office.
Great idea.
Anything else? Thank you. Director Dunlop, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 3 updates for the committee this evening. First, just our regular update on Beckwith Street. Construction is proceeding well. The first crew that we have, we've got 2 crews working. The first crew working this week is focusing on installing the sewer manhole in front of the Bank of Montreal. That, of course, was delayed by an Enbridge conflict earlier in the project, so they're now getting to that activity. The second crew, of course, is carrying on with the construction of the water main from the south end of the block heading up towards the Main Street intersection. Indications are, I mean, the project is going well. We're not encountering as much rock excavation as anticipated, and that, of course, is probably one of the largest risks going into the project, so we're very pleased with that today. We are going to be meeting with Ottawa Greenbelt this week to start to talk about prospective schedules for paving in December. Again, that would be the sacrificial lift of asphalt over top of the trench work we do this year, so we're going to have a little more information to report the next meeting on that. Another activity going on right now, we're going through the second progress payment on the contract as well, so we're going through those quantities with their team this week and hope to get their end of November payment through soon. We've updated the DBA this morning with information on the project. We've also shared that by email to council, and we do have it also posted on the town's website under the Beckwith Street webpage under announcements and updates. So keep looking to that location for the latest, greatest information on progress on the project. Another item we heard from the business community it was the signage on the fencing at the corner of the intersections was a little too small, so we ordered up new signage for the businesses, so hopefully that'll be posted very soon, make it a little more clear. So we're hearing, we're reacting, and we're implementing. So moving on to the second item, Confederation Bridge. We've had a meeting with Parks Canada to talk about all of the prospective options of the bridge. We want to get a clear understanding on what we might be getting into on replacements, whether it's single deck or a two-lane structure. We've taken that information and we've met with Keystone Bridges from Kingston, and they're working on developing like a risk matrix for council so that they understand what each of the different approaches will involve, how they're different, and what risks and uncertainties would come with each. So we're hoping to get back before council, hopefully before the end of the year, with pricing and information on each of those options. Third report this evening, we're pleased to report we're taking delivery of our 2019 loader tomorrow from Nortrax. We're very pleased to have another major upgrade in our fleet, so we're again very thankful to council for that investment. It's a key piece of equipment that's going to be very it's going to serve us well over the coming winter. So that's it.
Any questions or comments? Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Director Dunlop, are you going to, in that list of options, are you going to be putting a restoration of our beautiful bridge that's there as one of the options?
Most definitely. I mean, just at a high level, the options are what we touched on in our last staff update to council. So we're looking at the existing bridge rehabilitated for strictly an active transportation option. We're looking at the existing bridge rehabilitated for multi-use option with traffic. A new single lane bridge, we need to understand, cost scenarios, what a new bridge would be versus rehabilitation of the existing. And the final, of course, would be a two-lane bridge structure that I think would be the most intrusive environmentally and most costly, but we'll be reporting on all four of those scenarios to council regardless.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Director Dunlop. So moving on to correspondence. So we did receive a letter from a Ms. Cutler dated November the 14th. It's available on our website if anybody would like to read it. That's fine. Thank you. Priority item 7A, letter from the Cataraqui Region Conservation Authority, Friends of the Cataraqui Trail. You'll recall that recently we received a letter from this group looking for a representative from the town of Smiths Falls to join them. So I would put it open. I think we talked about it in some detail when it came out, but if there's any further discussion, and I think we did want to have a representative. Councillor Allen.
Yeah, I went to the Recreation Summit, and it just happened that most of that day was spent on hikes and trails and the tourism that hikes on trails and trails, just having trails in your community offers. And one of the things that I shared that day too is the hope that they'll link, because that's the whole point of how much work we're putting in and money we're putting into them. So I'm happy if no one else wants to sit on that. I understand from reading it's one meeting a month, so I think I can do it. It's the last Thursday of the month, I think. If no one has a burning desire to do
Mayor
it.
Panko,
I'll second that motion.
any other comments? So it's been moved by Mayor Panko and seconded by Councillor Dwyer that Councillor Allen will be appointed the representative, and that will come up at our next council meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah, resolution, so there's agreement for that. Any further discussion on that? We'll move right along. Thank you, Councillor Allen. The budget monitoring report, Director Cozille's going to speak to us regarding October 2019. Where are we at? And many of you have had this for a few days, so
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm here this evening to provide council with a high-level update after completing October's budget monitoring. We are still currently trending an overall deficit of about $67,000. The water and wastewater budgets are in a deficit, albeit slightly higher than September's. Water is $125,000, wastewater is about $62,000. And the tax supported is still in a surplus, albeit it's lower than it was in September at $120,000. I did want to bring to your attention a very significant variance in the October. That the industrial supplemental billings have been completed for this year, and the results were much lower than what we had anticipated and budgeted for. We budgeted $500,000. The actuals come in at $40,000. Thankfully, there is a reserve for tax assessment at risk, so the impact isn't quite as harsh as it could have been. So it's going to be a transfer of about $286,000 out of that. It does leave us, I believe the balance is still in there of about $60,000. However, in 2020, there's several substantial building permits that have received occupancy that we should be receiving in about May, I believe, is what the date they had indicated to us for 2020. So we've budgeted again the $500,000 that we had in 2019. So if council had any questions on the variances or any other questions, I'd be happy to answer.
comments, questions? No, thank you, Director Cozille. It was a good report. Appreciate it. Moving right along. The 7C, the pre-budget approval and purchase of sidewalk plow. Director Dunlop. And you'll recall, those of you at one of our budget meetings recently, we talked about this option of looking at a used, good quality, barely used plow, and so Director Dunlop's going to talk to us about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The purpose of the report before committee tonight is to seek exemption from the procurement bylaw for the purchase of a used sidewalk plow unit as part of the 2020 budget. Just for a little background, the town currently does sidewalk maintenance in the winter with two sidewalk plow units. We have a 2010 model and a 2015 model. The 2020 budget had, as drafted in the first draft, had sought out replacement of the 2010 unit with a new unit priced at $185,000. That, of course, would include the sidewalk tractor and the associated attachments. Over the last 3 years, 2016 through 2018, we've faced very significant pressures keeping the 2010 model running. Our maintenance and repair costs have actually gone up to $52,000 over a 3-year period. I should add, when you talk about our entire fleet in Public Works, the machines that require the most maintenance are actually the sidewalk units. Even compared to a loader or a grader, they're very high demand for ongoing maintenance and repair. During the first draft, Public Works became aware that the City of Ottawa turned in a lease for actually six of their sidewalk plow units were 2016 models. They were returned under lease to Joe Johnson Equipment. The maintenance agreement with those units with the City of Ottawa was also dealer maintained, so these units were in great shape. When we became aware of this opportunity, we sent staff down to have a look at these units and see what condition they were. At the time we were down there, we identified, we looked at all 6 units, and our staff identified a very appealing unit. They were a 2016 trackless MT6 tractor there. It only had 941 hours on it, and from a maintenance perspective, over 3 winters, that's very little use in terms of time. We've also looked at a series of attachments there that suit our needs, and the pricing's been included in the report. Our department recognizes that we have some significant pressures in the draft 2020 budget. Obviously, we're seeing what we can do for our part in helping out with that. At the same time, Public Works, under our asset management plan, has its fleet deficit of about $390,000. So we're going to have to inject some creativity into our fleet purchasing in the next couple of years to try to raise that deficit. I think going after new equipment every year is not going to get us to where we need to be. We've rolled out 4 options in the report before council for consideration tonight. The first option would be, we'll say status quo with the first draft of the budget, and that would be to move forward with a purchase of a tractor as presented with attachments for $185,000 total cost. The second option in the report before committee, which is our preferred option, would be to purchase the sidewalk plow with a front flail unit that's available for $6,500. That price carries a cost of $91,500 plus HST. The third attachment, if council wishes to consider, would just be to purchase a sidewalk plow with the winter attachments only. It's a little less money. It's $85,000 plus HST, but it would see us in an equipment shortage for next summer in terms of mowing capabilities. And of course, option 4 before committee as well is do nothing. I do want to make it clear to committee that the sidewalk plow replacement was 2021. It was not 2020. But in light of the maintenance costs, as we mentioned, $52,000 over the last 3 years, we feel it's almost unmanageable at this point to try and keep this equipment rolling. We had a lot of downtime last winter, which I think in combination with the very harsh winter conditions of the extreme thaws and freeze ups, that we really had a tough time last winter. So we really feel we need new equipment going into the next winter. So our recommendation before committee is to seek out pre-budget approval for the purchase of used equipment. Again, that would be a 2016 model tractor with attachments including a flail mower, and we are seeking pre-budget approval of $94,000 for that purchase.
Thank you, Director Dunlop. I have Councillor Dwyer, Mayor Panko, and Councillor Alford so far.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Troy, I think I'm going to recruit you onto my Christmas shopping team because you seem to be able to source a good deal. I don't have a problem with the preferred option 2. In principle, I think it's lucky that we found it at such a good price for everything we need. I do worry that it already has 3 years of service under its belt, and granted, you said that it was limited service. Is the lifespan on these models 10 years? Like, is that kind of the upper limit?
Yeah. Generally, because of the wear and tear on these machines, they're hauling very caustic equipment with the salt that they haul. A lot of wear and tear with the bumping and that's involved with going up and down the sidewalks. 10 years, if you can get 10 years out of sidewalk equipment, you're doing well. But from my knowledge, most asset management plans out there is 10 years is what most municipalities assign. In the case of the City of Ottawa, it's very interesting to see that they actually just lease them, use them, and send them back, just because of the challenges with the operations and maintenance. But again, our 2010 unit it's almost beyond being manageable at this point.
Okay. Well, I have no problem with accepting option 2, and hopefully it gets here sooner than the snow does.
Yeah.
Mayor Panko.
Troy, so the 941 hours, would that be typical of a 3-year, or is that more like a couple of years of use? Or?
Yeah, so in terms of just a calendar year, I mean, our public works operations are 2,080 hours per worker per year. So again, you look at a half season, you break that down into winter months. This is pretty light hours. This equipment, I don't think, was rolling all 4 seasons. It had to have been just working the winter season. So 300 hours a year is pretty low usage, and that's part of the appeal in this one unit we're looking at.
And I assume the 2010 model wasn't a trackless?
No, it is not.
Okay, don't need to name the brand, I guess. It's very problematic. Any consideration for extended warranty?
For a 3-year unit, It's going to get a full service before we take access of it at no cost. That I know.
Okay. And then finally, the mower. So this unit we do use in the summer where?
So they have a front flail. It's 74 inches wide. It's again a three-year-old model. The price that they're seeking used on it, $6,500. The retail for that piece of equipment new is about it's close to just under $11,000 plus HST. So again, we see a very favorable price on that. The unfortunate thing is the attachments we have with our current 2010 model just simply aren't interchangeable between the different manufacturers. But we're hoping to go out, again, subject to council's approval, we're hoping to go out to market and find someone that will give a second service life to the 2010 unit, probably private sector perhaps, but it needs a lot of TLC to.
But is this loan to Parks and Rec for the summer season, or where do your staff use it for mowing?
We use it for, we do a lot of mowing out in the industrial park. We do roadsides with these units. We do a fair amount of mowing with them. Easements, there's a lot of areas, unopened road allowances, various locations throughout town.
Okay. Well, as Councilor Dwyer said, I think seems to be a great value, and especially when we're looking at public safety, making sure our sidewalks are cleaned, salted, and sanded, and with one unit at risk, we need to do it. So, well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Alford.
I somewhat echo Councillor Dwyer's. I'm really appreciative of who you know and how you find out things, and the relationships that you've built over all this time in Public Works, because it's paying off for Smiths Falls, I think, on several occasions. So I appreciate that, and I do support option 2. And I am very thankful that our staff, even before we had to ask during the budget process, were already looking at ways to knowing what was facing us. There's several of our staff who had already gone out and volunteered to make some of this stuff happen. So I appreciate that, Troy.
Thank you.
So I'm seeing consensus, and this will come forward at the next council meeting. So if you haven't put a deposit down, you can at least tell them that so far you've got a lot of support for this. Don't let them sell it.
Yeah. We have not put any deposits down,
All right.
but it's being held.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we're at 7D, the loan authorization for Honeywell Energy Audit Projects, and Director Koziel's back up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the purpose of my report this evening is to obtain council's approval to complete the borrowing of the funds needed for the Honeywell Energy Audit. The total of the loan will be $786,742.16. It is important to note the total project cost was $1,043,406. The balance of that was offset by 2 rebates that we received, as well as capital reserves. So attached to the report, there is also a Schedule H. So the RBC corporate rep has indicated that the interest rate is not to exceed 3.25, because the day of taking down the draw is when it'll be exact. So I just wanted to let you know that. So it's a 5-year interest term and 15-year amortization, and that was discussed when we talked about going forward with the Honeywell projects. And so my goal is to obtain this before the end of December. So with council's approval, we'll do the borrowing bylaw at next council.
Questions, comments? There seems to be support. What's not mentioned in your report is just the link to climate change. And not only are we saving money and by upgrading our lighting system, but reducing the impact on our carbon footprint. So I think we're winning on many levels on this. So unless I hear anything different, we'll be bringing that forward to council at the next. Oh, Mayor Pinkel?
Yeah, I think it's probably the first loan, the first borrowing we've done in about 5 years, and in the situation, just so the community understands, the energy savings created by this program more than cover the cost of borrowing. So it's a good move.
Yes, so it was in the report. So the overall projected savings are $91,000, and the loan is about $66,000. So we're going to be in a surplus of about $15,000. So.
Thank you, Director Koziel. We're moving right along. The Canopy Growth Corporation and their signed bylaw. Director Costello.
Thank you.
Canopy Growth has put an application in for a variance to our sign bylaw. The signs are for wayfinding signs throughout their campus. It is an industrial zone and it is ground signs, so there is 2 variances required. One is to allow more than one ground sign at the property. As council is aware that one Hershey Drive has had additional properties added to it over the last couple of years. I think it's actually now 3 properties at one Hershey Drive. And as well, the second variance is to allow for a maximum height of 10 feet, and the bylaw restricts it to 7 currently. There is representation here from Canopy Growth this evening. If council has any questions they'd like to direct to them, looking for council to approve a variance at the next meeting of council.
I've got Councillor Alford and Councillor Dwyer.
Yes, and thank you, Director Costello. I think you've made the case for making the exceptions. It certainly is a huge campus now. It didn't start out that way, but it certainly is now. Anything Hershey had previously done has been far overshadowed by the growth of Canopy. So I am supportive of both of those, and I appreciate the aesthetic of the signs actually myself. So I will be supporting this.
Thank you.
Councillor Dwyer.
Thanks. Yeah, Carrie, I just have a general question. I noted that Tokyo Smoke is noted on the signs. Is it anticipated that Tokyo Smoke will be the retail location that comes to Hershey Drive?
I have absolutely no idea.
I didn't think so.
Is that something you can answer, Chris?
Sure. My name is Chris Smith, and I represent Idea Inc., who are the designers for the campus wayfinding signage, and I'm one of the project managers who works for the company.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm not sure exactly whether or not they have plans to open up a Tokyo Smoke coffee shop on the campus. They have a small little kiosk inside the visitor center that sells some of that brand, but whether or not there's going to be one down the road, I couldn't tell you.
Councillor Allen.
Yeah, I was just going to echo Councillor Alford. The signs are very nice, and just driving around that campus now to see how that whole area has become transformed, even with the mural that's put on the back side of it, the interest. I really commend you on doing a beautiful job of not only just finding your way, but just how the whole complex is beautiful. I compliment you on that.
Thanks.
Mayor Penko.
Yeah, just to echo what's been said, I think it's they're aesthetically appealing. I have no problem with the excessive size that's over and above our bylaw, because this is an exceptional campus with that you need signage that size in order for people to see it. So I've got no problem with it.
So I'm hearing consensus, and this will come forward to council at the earliest.
December 2nd.
Probably
December 2nd?
can come that quick. That's great.
Next week.
So thank you very much, and thanks for coming, and you've probably learned a lot more about municipal council than you planned to. But
entertaining.
You're welcome to stay for the whole shebang.
Thanks.
Thank you, Director Costello. So we're moving on to the CIP application for funding on 27 Beckwith Street North. Senior Planner Grenke's going to walk us through this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation from the CIP committee and staff is to authorize the execution of a funding agreement for a CIP application under Program 1. So as the property formerly occupied by Norm's Restaurant is now under new ownership, and a new tenant is moving in. He's looking to open up a new restaurant at that location. So he's been undertaking a fairly significant amount of renovations, both inside and outside. So what we have this evening is an application under Program 1 for a sign and for gooseneck lighting. So the total value that's being requested here is just under $2,000. So the sign is proposed to be aluminum composite with mounted letters on a black wood frame around it. The proponent has indicated that they may be undertaking significant, substantial facade enhancement in the future, and certainly the CIP committee would very much welcome that application in the future. But at this point, what's being requested is the sign. So in 2017, council approved an amendment to the CIP program, delegating approval authority for applications less than $4,000 to the CIP committee. However, still requires council approval for a funding agreement. And even for a small application, a funding agreement is important to just to implement the terms and conditions of the committee's approval, and with council's approval, then this would be executed at the next available opportunity, and the funds released once the sign is placed.
Thank you, Mr. Grinke. Any comments or questions? Councillor Dwyer?
I think it's a pretty small ask for a good return on investment. It's important to note that the applicant in this situation is a tenant that's going to run the restaurant. The landlord owns the building, where you've got a lot of the architectural features, the windows, the soffits, the old signboards aren't included in this, but it's two different people, two different potential applications. So hopefully we can encourage the landlord to come forward for round two, and it'll be a game changer for that corner of town.
Thank you, Councillor Allen.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor McGuire. I was driving by just looking at the building on the weekend, and I also noticed that the new owner has made a much better fire escape exit. It was always wooden, I think, and it wasn't in great condition, but now it looks like it's wrought iron. It looks very nice at the back of the building, so hopefully they'll work together to have more improvements on the front of the building as they grow. Thank you.
It just seems like there's a lot of support for it. I would say that it's a step in the right direction. I know if Councillor McGuire had his way, the whole facade would be getting, and maybe we'll get there soon. So that will come forward next week as well, I'm assuming. Thank you, Mr. Grinke. Strategic plan monitoring. Director Costello is going to lead that discussion.
Thank you. I'm bringing this forward on behalf of CAO Morris this evening. Outlined in the report, he's outlined again the key strategic priorities, the six that you all around the Horseshoe came up with. And attached to it in the appendix is a brief outline on the status of all of those projects. For the most part, everything seems to be on time. He did note in the second page of the report, there are two that aren't advancing as quickly as possible. One being the town hall renovations, with which Director Manhire has already provided an update during director's reports. The second being the housing task force, which I'm happy to report that I think we have enough applications now that we've filled all the sectors. So we'll be able to bring that forward as soon as we have another committee of the whole meeting. So that might bring that back on track. So just bringing this forward this evening for council's information. And I'd look to Deputy Clerk. I don't know if we have to formally receive this via motion, if that's what's been done in the past, but it's for information only at this point.
Okay. Councillor Alford.
Just really a comment. When I was going through this after all of the building on the strategic plan from the council before, we're almost a year with our having taken our seats at this Horseshoe, and not only is it sort of I'm very proud of this council, how far and how fast we have moved our strategic priorities ahead, and it's almost our anniversary.
Any other comments, question? I did have one, and I think I brought it up when we were developing this plan, and it's relating to our urban forest. And I note that we've got a 5% increase in our urban forest coverage per year. And I think at the time we talked about it, I didn't know what the N was, because 5% of what? It's on the second page, 2.2. I just, without knowing what is our forest canopy, how can we, I love more trees, keep them coming, but I don't know how many we're losing, and I also don't know what we started with. So, and that'll be a project in itself. Maybe I'm not looking for an answer. I just, if you do have an N, or what that 5% increase, it will just be tricky to measure it.
You can answer it. I'll let Director Manhire answer that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have some components of the puzzle that we're developing. We had a meeting with planning last week to take a look at what does this really mean to us and how do we quantify it, and then how can we impact it. We have, through the service review for Parks and Recreation, identified the number of trees in the parks, for instance. So we know how many we have there. This year, we lost trees and we replaced 48 of the trees that we did lose. And when I say replaced 48, I mean that we lost approximately 11 and we replaced them with 48. So that's kind of ahead of the policy, but we are working on developing that policy, quantifying it, and then bringing in strategies to affect it.
Thank you. I think when we get into our plan for climate action, we will probably try to get a little more precise around that, and I think it's a great step in the right direction, and overall I'm really pleased with the plan. So thank you for the work the staff have put into this. Appreciate it very much.
Just to quantify you talked earlier, Council spoke earlier of the Honeywell project. That project with the energy savings defers 140 tons of carbon.
Great, thank you. Hearing nothing more, we really do appreciate this report. Thank you. So now we're down to H, Collegiate Court Official Plan and Zoning Amendment, and Senior Planner Grenke's back up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm bringing forward a report and a recommendation on a zoning and official plan amendment application that relates to the former Smith Falls Collegiate Institute property at 2 Gould Street. Following the closure of the school, the property was purchased by the Samir Group, and the existing building was redeveloped into a mixed-use center featuring both residential, especially on the upper level, and commercial institutional type uses on the lower level. The Samirs, the owners of the property, have approached the town to plan for the next stage of the development of the 11-acre property, which was brought forward by a changing demand for space within their building, and what has become, in their view, a very strong demand for residential units, certainly within the last couple of years. Right now, the property is designated uptown mixed use in our official plan. That recognizes the primacy of commercial uses while accommodating residential development in a secondary role. And it's zoned general commercial special exception 13, which was the zoning category that was created in 2008 and amended in 2011, that allows ground floor residential in the building so long as it does not take up more than 50% of the floor area, among a few other provisions. Most specifically, the uptown mixed-use designation also spells out density targets for commercial development, and that's expressed by a gross floor area ratio of at least 0.5 up to a maximum of 3. Gross floor area ratio in this case references the ratio between the total floor area of commercial uses in relation to the size of the lot, and it's how our OP generally prescribes density of commercial uses. Staff and the applicants have viewed, through this process, we viewed this as an opportunity to have a look at a development possibility and also the appropriate mix of uses on a large lot as a whole, recognizing that it is distinct in size and location compared to many other units in the uptown mixed-use designation. In the opinion of staff, it's a uniquely large, underutilized mixed-use development site at the north end of town, and given that it is within an area that the plan identifies as a targeted growth area, there's a key opportunity there. The Samir Group first approached staff to open up the policy to allow a greater distribution of residential uses in the school building, but while they were at it, they wanted to have a look at the rest of the property and explore future residential development opportunities in expectation that this is where the greatest development pressure would be. They recognize that most of the services needed to support that future development aren't there now, and that would obviously need to be addressed. The proposed OP and zoning framework set forth by their consultant planner is reflective of some discussion between town staff and their team. From our perspective, we were interested to see that there's still a consideration for mixed use and looking for mixed-use development and commercial development along Elmsley Street. That's an important access road into the town, and we feel our official plan very much supports that that retention there. We also wanted to see consideration for how this would potentially affect the viability of existing and potential future employment uses in surrounding properties in the uptown mixed-use designation, and also how it ties into the land needs background study from 2014, which was a foundational document that informed a lot of council's decision about land use designations at the time. And finally, it was important for the applicants to show how they plan to phase and accommodate service extensions. As noted in the report, there's a public meeting on October 10th to consider the application, and we had a single member of the public who owned nearby property he attended. He didn't express any concerns. Technical feedback came in from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. We requested MMAH feedback as they were involved in the original official plan process and may take an interest in any such application, any such OPA application if it affects provincial interests. In this case, the MMAH planner did not indicate a concern. Public Works advised they were generally okay with the wording, however requested the stormwater management be specifically added as another development condition to be satisfied. The applicants were in agreement with that, and that's reflected in the recommended wording at the top of the report. So what's proposed by this application is a policy framework that would likely be implemented in several steps. Firstly, the property owners are seeking to allow the evolution of the existing school building to allow more residential units on the lower level. This wouldn't prohibit commercial development, but it would remove the cap on residential floor space. Beyond that, they're looking for policies that generally establish the ground rules and configuration for and orientation for future new development. The proposed official plan amendment sets forth a policy framework that allows medium-density residential uses to predominate. It directs commercial activity to the existing building and new buildings along Elmsley Street, and also states that commercial uses are to be regulated and compatible with residential uses, and residential density would be proposed at up to 50 units per hectare, and that's considered medium density in our official plan. The zoning bylaw would implement the broad policy direction of the OP with specific rules that apply to this property only. So commercial uses would still be permitted on any floor, so long as there's not a commercial use above a residential use, and that's to mitigate land use impacts. New development along Elmsley Street would need to have commercial uses on the ground floor. However, residential uses can be on the other side of the building. The application proposes a minimum number of units in a residential building at 4, and that's to ensure that this is indeed medium density development there as envisioned by the plan and the targeted growth area. And an enhanced and step back Elmsley Street setbacks reflect the hospital proximity and the flight path. So our zoning bylaw actually has a flight path provisions related to development near the hospital. And then minimum distances proposed between multi-residential buildings are proposed to limit shadowing and other such impacts. And finally, the application proposes a holding provision, which means that any new development cannot happen until appropriate connections and infrastructure upgrades are in place. And the report identifies where the servicing is at in relation to the site, and it doesn't go too far into the site. So this would not apply to redevelopment within the existing building footprint, which is of course already serviced, but that would be enabled, and that redevelopment of the existing footprint, if the zoning is enacted, can happen right away, but pertains to new buildings elsewhere on the lot. So it was proposed as a policy framework to allow this custom mix of development with exact design and technical details to be determined in the future as concepts are advanced, and subject, of course, to council approval in lifting the holding zone and any site plan approvals. So in my opinion, what's been advanced here has been quite well supported by the consultant planner and justified in the planning rationale. So the application, I think, it does reflect the characteristics of the site. It's presently accessed mostly through local roads, Gould and Maitland, though there is driveway access off of Elmsley as well, but that's largely through low-density residential neighborhoods. So commercial density envisioned in the uptown mixed-use density or uptown mixed-use designation would be challenging to obtain on a lot this size. So it's felt that a reorientation to a predominantly residential character would be an appropriate planning outcome. The site's appropriately sited for a residentially focused development as well, given given the health services, walking distance of major recreational facilities with the arena and parkland very close by. The location of medium-density residential development in close proximity to established and compatible community amenities is considered good planning in that it reduces reliance on longer vehicle trips, supports active transportation, and promotes community cohesion. The area is within a targeted growth area, and certainly that's the official plan is supportive of a higher density of development in that area, and it actually it's looking for a target of 25% residential development in targeted growth areas be measured every 5 years. So the application proposes a logical area-specific policy approach to allow and guide the intensification as the services become available. So the application does not actually remove the ability for commercial development on the site, and I think it's important that that potential still be there. It's within keeping of the broader scope outlined in the OP, but it rather creates some flexibility to determine a land use mix more in line with the market needs of the day. So I will note as well that the property does have a heritage designation associated with it, and that ties into the archway that's associated with the former with the original school, and that's the only part of the building that still stands. So certainly it would be our expectation through any future site plan and development concept to work with the applicant to ensure that that important feature is enhanced and highlighted as best as possible. So the holding. So I think we also recognize too that services would need to be extended, and that would be. The overall, the future development of the site will necessitate servicing and transportation extensions, and the exact needs would be driven by the scale of development as it's proposed. So we expect that would likely be result in consideration of holding zones being lifted in phases involving certain parts of land. So a holding zone is a planning tool provided for under the Planning Act, and that's where the town can zone and designate lands for development, however delay development pending completion or realization of certain development conditions as determined by council. So in this case, if council supports the principle of the policy adjustments for this property, then a holding zone would be an appropriate planning tool to hold development until the conditions that we establish are done. So based on a review of the submitted information and assessment of the guiding planning policies, staff have come to the opinion that this proposed policy framework is a responsible pattern of development, and the redesignation of these lands to emphasize residential development is consistent with the intent of the PPS and can be accommodated without undertaking a comprehensive review. So the holding zone, of course, enables and ensures municipal control in terms of design and access, and as such, it's the staff recommendation that council adopts the official plan amendment and then subsequently the zoning amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grinke. And again, another robust report. And this one has a lot of moving parts, it seems to me. I have a question from Councillor Dwyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple. Carl, your staff report references a concept plan, but it wasn't included in the report. Do you have a concept plan?
I do, and I apologize for that. It is, of course, very preliminary, but this is just a reference of what they think development may look like. It can,
yeah, for sure.
With the chair's permission, I can circulate this.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. The only real question I have is with respect. Okay. The only real question I have with this is with respect to the idea that that all of these buildings are going to be mixed use, and I worry that there's more of a demand for exclusive residential buildings than mixed use buildings. Can you provide any comment on your rationalization for why mixed use is appropriate and best used on this site?
Certainly. So with through the chair, the uptown mixed use designation, as informed by the by the land need study has identified the ideal nature of commercial development on that site, but we recognize the overall size of that property likely cannot sustain the gross floor area that's being recommended. So in this case, the proposed policy that's being outlaid would only be requiring the mixed-use development along for future development along the Elmsley Street frontage, where there's access to more of a major road. So it's expected that development on the interior of the property, or anything facing Gould Street, or perhaps out back in the future, the policy would enable that to be exclusively residential.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair, the only other comment I have is with respect to the list of agencies and groups that have provided technical feedback, and I note that the Heritage Committee is not included. Was the application circulated to the Municipal Heritage Committee?
The application was not, through the chair, the application was not circulated to the Municipal Heritage Committee. At this point, we don't have a concept or any sort of development that would have any impact on the archway, but certainly through the holding zone provision and the site plan control applications in the future that could arise, that's where we would have to have a much closer look at the impacts on the archway and any and ensuring that future development fits in with that characteristic.
Okay, and then my last question, did you give any consideration to the need for a heritage impact statement as part of your holding zone?
I did give some consideration to that, and that's a good point. I think, I think it's certainly reasonable it's a reasonable ask from council's perspective if council feels that would be appropriate. I didn't ask for it, just as I believe through the site plan process, we have the ability to have that closer look and determine if one is warranted, depending on the nature and location of future development.
Any other questions? Comments? I'm assuming I saw both Councillor Alford and Councillor Brennan pass both those motions, and there's support for going ahead with this, so, okay. So thank you very much, Mr. Grinke. That's a very well-written report, and appears we have support among council for this. Thank you. Yes. So the Heritage, as a part of that rider, for lack of a better term, what's it called?
The holding zone.
What I heard you say is that you can do it now, or you can do it later, or you can do it both times. It doesn't, Councillor Alpha, that's what I understood.
Well, that's what I understand as well. We're pretty high level here right now. But I will say, the report that was presented to Planning Advisory, it certainly talks about the cultural heritage of that archway. In fact, there's some quotes here. All new development permitted in the policies of this plan shall conserve cultural heritage resources, making every attempt to incorporate the resources into any new development plans. So in the report that was presented to Planning Advisory, the arch was considered, and I'm assuming will be more so as we move forward with that development.
So it would be redundant to add it on top of it now, and it'll come later if as need be?
My recommendation is,
That's a question for my colleagues.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Is it over, the question while you're out of the room was
Thank you.
whether we need to include that heritage point in the hold, or it can come later, unless council wants to emphasize it. So Councillor Allen, you were going to say something?
Well, I think it's important, I mean, I would prefer it done now, but I don't know if my colleagues don't agree, but I think that the fear I would have, and I don't think this would happen, knowing this developer, and I appreciated the fact that they, as Councillor Alford said, they actually said that they would give protection to it, is that how do we best have it part of it? It's a very modern area, and we need the residential area, but how do we do that? Is it going to be a small green space? I mean, it's going to be an interesting thing, so I think that's what Councillor Dwyer was thinking. You know, I think it doesn't hurt to start asking those questions and planning for how it, even though it's in a holding pattern, but that's my thought.
Did you want to add more to that, Councillor Dwyer?
Yeah, I agree, and I'll echo Councillor Allen's points. I mean, and I missed most of what Councillor Alfred said, but I think I'm going to rephrase it properly. I mean, the requirement for consideration is already there. The applicant and the Planning Advisory Committee have both acknowledged the importance of having it considered. So there's no reason not to put it in the holding, particularly if we have staff changeover or something. It's a written record that it's considered and is going to be vital to the completion of the site plan application. So I would have more confidence in having it specifically included in there. But the only other thing that I will note is that the way that the zoning has been worded right now, without a heritage impact statement that would be contrary to the existing provisions, you could foreseeably have a building within 3 to 6 meters around that arch. So I think the heritage the heritage impact statement will give you better control and guidance around what an appropriate setback of that structure would be.
It doesn't cost us anything to add it. It's not a lot of staff time just to add that piece to it.
No, it's simply, if that's the direction of council, I would look for just some direction on the wording. Do we want to specifically state heritage impact assessment or just have a broader wording for heritage to be considered? Because there's the possibility then that we may be looking at the next phase of development might be a couple 100 feet away from there.
Yeah, I would leave that to you, Mr. Grenke. You're the expert on this. I think the point is that council would like to see that added, and I would leave it in your good hands to work on the wording.
I'm pleased to make that. I will add that to. I'll add that to the wording.
Okay, thank you very much for that. 7I, Municipal Heritage Committee, Town Hall renovation report. Again, Mr. Grenke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm reporting on the Municipal Heritage Committee's perspective on the Town Hall renovations. As the committee knows, the Town Hall property, which includes the Town Hall and the original public school building, now part of the municipal complex, is a designated heritage property. The designation bylaw was passed in 1977 and is attached to the report. Evident from the bylaw, there's really not very much specific detail about what's in about the building or what's truly valued. Under the Ontario Heritage Act, alterations to designated buildings can only be made with the written authorization of council. For properties that are designated in a post-2002 bylaw, council's approval is required if the alteration is likely to affect the property's heritage attributes as set out in the description of the property's heritage attributes in the bylaw. The 1977 bylaw does not set out heritage attributes, and instead, the advice we've been given in situations like this is that we go by the previous standard, and that is, does the alteration affect the reason for the designation? So we had to look at this transitional element, for instance, when you were looking at the old post office renovations. The Act requires consultation with the MHC. However, at the end of the day, the approval of an alteration rests with council. So when I, as my own practice, when I bring proposals for designated heritage properties to the MHC, the practice I followed is firstly determine with the committee whether this is an alteration, and if so, is that a desirable one? And then that would lead to a discussion with the committee and the MHC determining their advice that they give to council. In this case, the committee recognizes that the property owner, the applicant, and the approval authority are all one and the same, and that's being town council. And the committee came to the view that the proposed renovations are indeed an alteration as envisioned in the Act. So it was important to the committee, and I'll emphasize this, that in striving to present a positive and collaborative view of heritage in the town, we also want to set that example with our own projects, and that's and I've heard that from committee members. And the committee focused their discussion on the outside of the building, recognizing that the interior was outside of their mandate and not tied to the original reason for the designation. The committee, following the review of the plans and discussion with Director Manhire, was broadly supportive of many of the changes, recognizing the importance of the restoration of the hose tower and for the keeping of the tin ceilings in the 2-bay. By far, the greatest amount of the discussion that was had related to the arch at the front facing Beckwith Street. I'll let the motion that was appended to the report speak to itself. However, my view of the discussion that led to the wording that was selected is it showed the appreciation most of the committee had for this feature and its context, and also that this may in the future have a much greater heritage appreciation. The wording also reflected the reality that the arch was built around 1984 after the existing designation bylaw was adopted. Staff and the MHC recognize the 1977 bylaw, and many of our older bylaws are not terribly helpful in trying to determine heritage value. While the committee would like to, as resources permit, replace our old designation bylaws in time, in order to properly itemize the heritage attributes worthy of resignation, we don't have a revised bylaw for this property in place right now, and if there is, the ultimate decision authority on whether the arch or any other feature is a heritage attribute is council's, and the decision on whether that should be altered is also council's. Planning staff appreciate the discussion at the MHC about the contextual significance of the arch, and unfortunately we weren't able to find any evidence or records as to how or whether the arch was considered back in 1984 and whether heritage was even assessed at the time. So I'll certainly defer technical questions about the renovation to Director Manhire, but in this case, by way of this report, I'm presenting for Council's information the motion that was adopted by the MHC on November 14th. Director Manhire has also obtained a schematic showing what the front of the building will look like with the arch retained, and he can provide those if he hasn't already. The chief building official, pursuant to the Ontario Heritage Act, has indicated that a council resolution pertaining to the requested alteration would be in order to piece together a complete permit application. If council so chooses, staff can work on some wording options to that end based on how council feels about the aspects of the project, and as staff are directed by council, and we can bring that forward to the next meeting of council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McGuire.
Thank you, Councillor McKenna. I'd like to start off by thanking Senior Planner Grenke for all the work that's gone into this. It's definitely, when we've got these gray bylaws, it's really hard to try to figure out, what's our mandate, what are we keeping, what are we leaving, and I think it goes to show the need to put some resources into rewriting the bylaws, because it makes it easier on the property owner and the committee and on staff, and it should be a win-win-win. That being said, I would like to make some recommendations that we give, make a recommendation to staff to keep the arch. I think that the architecture of the arch is inspired by the front side of the town hall. As Carl said, it's got a unique architectural style. It represents the 1984 renovation. It goes right down to the bedrock, so I'm not sure if it's got some Cold War inspiration behind it, but it tells the story of the building, and in 50, 100, 150 years, it's going to be the last remnant of that type of architecture that we'll have on this campus. The second recommendation would be to put mullions on the fire bay doors. The mullions are the small bars that segregate the panels of a window. Why that's important is because it gives an ode to the original use for the space. Instead of having one big pane of glass, it's just several rectangular panes that gives that throwback to when it was a door, even if it's not a full restored, imitated version of what was originally there. The third thing is that I think it's important that we get the masonry repairs done to the standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in Canada, to make sure it's really easy to damage the soft brick on a project like that, and I think it's really important that we have that in writing, that it's going to be done to that standard, so that we don't spend all this money on it just to have it fall down 10 years later. And third, I would like to see council give direction to the Municipal Heritage Committee to prioritize rewriting the bylaws, so we have something tangible to work with before Phase 3 comes ahead, so we're not put back in this gray zone again. I don't know if there's consensus or discussion around that, but those are the 4 recommendations I'm making tonight.
So just so I'm clear, this is coming from you personally, Councilor, not the Heritage Committee, or is it?
This is coming, based on the last meeting of the Heritage Committee, I'd say the majority of members support what I'm recommending. Although because of the gray area, it's difficult for staff to come up with a clear recommendation, because it's not a very clearly written bylaw. So I would say this would functionally get everything done that the majority of the Heritage Committee is looking to see in the project.
So again, just so I'm clear, I think the first three are around the current phase of the recommendation. The last one is about going forward and getting so can we just separate those? Because
Absolutely, yeah.
okay. So I've got Councillor Alford, Councillor Dwyer, and Councillor Brennan. Mayor.
Do we, and through the chair, I'm not sure who's going to answer this, but how does that impact the cost of what we're attempting to do? If we were to agree with the three conditions that Councillor McGuire has laid out, what cost is there to the municipalities? Can anybody answer that? A little early to answer.
Mr. Cranky.
I would defer to Director Manhire to speak to that.
Through the chair, the only one that was actually in the recommendation was the idea of retaining the arch. The cost is approximately $12,000 to move the mechanical and structural to align with the arch and then incorporate the arch into the front of the building.
So I'm hearing support for retention of the arch. Can we get that one out of the way? Okay, we better go back to my list then. That didn't answer your question. So you're silent on the other costs at this point?
I was not aware of those recommendations, so we
Okay.
did not cost those out.
Okay, thank you.
So, through the chair, just a follow-up question. Did I just understand you to say we're going to have to move the arch?
No.
Okay.
Just to be clear, the arch cannot be moved.
Okay.
The arch is anchored in bedrock and cannot be lifted
It can
or
be,
moved.
it can be demolished, but
It
it
can be
can't
demolished
be moved.
or it can be incorporated into the front of the building.
And I always thought it might be easy just to say, are we going to leave it? And
The drawings that were initially done have the front doors lining up. They don't line up to the arch itself, so we would have to redesign the front of the building to move the entrance over to line up with the arch.
thank you. So I've got, is that,
No, not done yet.
okay.
So I just want to make sure, so we don't know the costs of the three recommendations if we have to redesign the front of the building, if we don't know what the cost of mullions are or of masonry prayers.
The- Sorry. The masonry repairs were very detailed in the design and the tender. So, like brick by brick in terms of what needed to be done, how far the grout needed to be cut back on which bricks needed to be replaced, and that was all part of the tender process. So when contractors bid, they bid on the work that was identified very excellently by the Venton Group in their initial design. So the host tower brickwork is part of the original tender. What is not, and has been discussed and is being strongly discouraged by the architects, is to do the windows. We can take a look at what those look like in the fire hall, but not to try to incorporate them into a heritage building. Generally, architectural design through the heritage, the design for architects, there's a heritage standards.
Yeah, the standards and guidelines for historic places in Canada.
Right, so what they say is that you do not do that, and a good example of that is going to be the Chateau Laurier
So before I go through my list, did you want to respond to that particular point, Councillor Dwyer? Or McGuire?
Yeah, I'd like to respond to, I think the Chateau Laurier is a little extreme here. The idea of putting the mullion, something that represents a mullion into the design of the bays, it's never going to look like an imitation door. We're not trying to put up an imitation door. It's always going to be able to be delineated that this was done in 2020 and the rest of the building was put up in the 1800s. But by referencing the past, it gives that kind of kudos to how the building's evolved through its useful life. And I think when you get into those kind of design disagreements, it's, you know what I mean, it's not something that it's black and white, but the idea here is not to make an imitation, it's to do something new that references the original purpose. I would say if the costs of the arch and the mullions are under the 10% contingency that's been associated with the project, we could maybe give pre-approval because we know it's not going to have a net cost at the end of the day. And as for the masonry repairs, it was noted by one of the members of the committee that there wasn't enough information provided on the technique of the masonry repair. There's a lot of work's gone into the quoting it. There's good money put into it. It's been really well spec'd from this point on. It's just we want to have that guarantee that as we're going to get value for money when it's completed. So I think that should be an easy one because if they've been doing their homework, they should go. I think the big thing that made that member of the committee nervous is just when the contractor's putting these advertisements out on social media to try to hire contractors to work on the project. There was some concern that maybe the person that's hired to do that work might not be qualified for it.
Director,
if I may, the heritage brickwork was actually sub-tendered out to a specialized company. So it's not who they're advertising for on Facebook.
Okay. So I've got Councillor Dwyer next.
Thanks. I'm going to try and go through Councillor McGuire's list, but Councillor McKenna, perhaps you can remind me if I get to the end and I've missed one. So with respect to the arch, if keeping the arch in itself is only about $12,000, and I assume the costing that Director Manhire just quoted would include the redesign of the front facade to align those doors? Oh, that is the redesign. And then, of course, we'd have we could reduce the cost for the demo and tipping fees associated with the removal of the waste, which I am assuming would net us something less than $12,000?
Through the chair, the contractor estimates that it's a wash at that point.
Okay, perfect.
So the additional cost would be for engineering and architectural work.
Okay, so at the end of the day, keeping the arch actually wouldn't foreseasibly cost us anything?
No.
Or
it
very
would cost
limited.
us the 12,000.
Oh, then to me, this is a no-brainer. I think the arch in and of itself, despite the fact that it is not listed as an attribute in the designating bylaw, it does form an integral part of the complex, and it's very representative of the era at which that addition was put on. And when you look at internationalism and postmodern internationalism, you see the type of style and construction that was used in 1986, Carl, was it?
1984.
84? Mirrored across communities in Ontario. And the idea of embracing postmodernism, particularly in civic centers, was something that really bloomed in the 80s, and it became very characteristic, not only for communities in Ontario, but across the country. And it's in a way that a lot of other countries around the world did not. So in my mind, I think it makes sense. The fact that it's not going to cost us anything is also brilliant. So I'd really like to see that arch stay.
Okay.
With respect to
Can we just stop there
Yep.
for a minute, please? If there's consensus to retain the arch, knowing what the cost is, can we just agree to that one and take it off the list? Is there any reason, anybody who would like to speak opposed to that or is against it? Mayor Panko.
Yeah, and I don't profess to have the knowledge of some of my colleagues here when it comes to the design, architecture, and the postmodernism. My question more relates to, does the arch actually enhance or inhibit the opportunities we have with this redesign of the front facade of our municipal complex? And if we're looking 100 years out or 150 years out, what we do today will be historical at that point in time. So it's hard for me to visualize you've got pictures showing both examples? Okay, so that may help me understand something I don't understand enough today.
Sure, please. So we'll come back to that point. Did you want to go through all four, or can I?
Well, Mr. Chair, I'll leave that up to you. I mean, how do you want to chair it?
Well, we weren't able to get consensus on the arch just yet, but we may.
Thanks.
If you could be brief, we could move along. So please keep going, Councillor Dwyer.
Okay. Yeah, having seen the plus VG renderings of both scenarios, I think I'm even more in favor of keeping the arch. So with respect to the, Councillor McGuire had concerns about brick masonry and restoration. Yeah, I assume that our contract for service has some sort of reference to the standards and guidelines for heritage conservation, and all practices would be followed in accordance with that manual. Then I'm fine with it. Any breach of that, I'm assuming we'd have recourse through. Art's nodding, yes. Okay, and then the mullions. I mean, I'll be honest, I don't remember what the rendering for that side of the building looked like. So I can't clearly see what a mullion would be proportional to in that window. Thanks, sir. Yeah, okay, so I mean, my preference is always to include mullions. They're a pretty cheap addition that can add some good impact on that facade. I get what Art's saying about, you know, paying homage to the era in which the work was undertaken. But that said, I mean, that's a very large glass opening, and I think maybe it could be broken up into smaller segments through the use of mullions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brennan?
Most of my questions were answered, so I guess my question would be about the municipal, the 4 points that you've made to my colleague. Have this been discussed and motioned at a municipal heritage committee meeting?
Councillor McGuire, do you want
to? The arch and the mullions and the masonry repairs have, well, sorry, the arch and the mullions have been discussed. The masonry repairs weren't, because the meeting was scheduled at an irregular time, and the member that was concerned about it was not able to attend the last 2 meetings because of their scheduling to try to speed this through. Rewriting the bylaw has not been discussed by the committee, but that's my recommendation as a councillor to council to say, you know what I mean, let's get us out of this situation for next time.
Okay. Anything further, Councillor Brennan? No? Okay. Mayor Panko?
Yeah, after reflection of the two images, renderings, I support retaining the arch. I think it does add to the building.
And Councillor, so it sounds like there's a consensus on the arch. So,
if I may, sorry, and
got that one
I'll support the mullions as well. And I have confidence that the tender for the host tower enhancements is adequate. And when it comes to the bylaw, I guess I'd like to see staff come back with a report on what it would take to review that bylaw or enhance that bylaw, modernize, if there's how much, if there's a cost involved. So that's something that, I mean, we have a lot of bylaws that need to be updated and improved upon. The question is how we prioritize.
Okay. Yes, Councillor Allen.
The bylaws are being worked on with 3 of us, 3 from the Heritage Committee. We've already agreed to rewrite them. It's something for the 9 years I've been on council we talked about and knew we needed, because some of the bylaws only have 2 or 3 sentences naming some of the features but not really describing why they're important. So there wouldn't be any cost to it. We're doing it in the evening or in our own time. I'm hoping if people approve that we go ahead and do that, because I mean, it should be done. It's something that we need to be doing.
Councillor Allen, do you have any comment on we've already signed off on the arch, the mullions and the brick masonry? We've heard that it's incorporated into the RFP and into the contract, that high standard of care, so I'm assuming we're in agreement for that.
Oh, for sure, and for me, the host tower, we had a lady that we hired from Economic Development come and do tours, historical tours, and when she saw our inside of our host tower at that time, as far as she's concerned, and she's been around and different places, but she said that she doesn't know of a host tower that was actually still used for drying hoses, and ours was up to, I think, 3 years ago. So it's intact, it's as it was originally, and what we're hoping to do with this one is have it sort of glass area fenced off, so that when we do our historical tours, that the doors can be open and people can actually look up and see what a host tower actually did. And so it's a very important,
Yeah,
I
it
feel
is.
it's a very important historic feature of the town hall. And,
And it sounds like it's been important right from the get-go, so. Councillor Alford, did you want another comment?
No, I support, Director Manhair's informed us about the masonry brick repairs, and that hopefully that information could have been asked at committee level too, like to get some comfort for the person who was concerned about that. And I'm fine with the mullions, and I'm fine with keeping them arch. And I'm very supportive of redoing bylaws that are from 1977 and getting in the way of effective committee work, because it is not only impacting the staff, it is impacting council and its ability to come up with measured, enact resolutions, make recommendations. I would say the same for several of the committees that I am currently serving on, who may be as old or older in terms of the bylaws. And if taking the bylaw into the hands of councillors to draft what they think it should be, at least it puts us one step ahead. It would still have to go through the Director of Corporate Services, and they would have to, the staff would look at it, pick it apart. But at least we would be moving the ball forward from 1977 or 1974 or 1978. So if this council wants to, committees of this council, or individuals on this council want to collaborate to put together that kind of work to be submitted for staff to look at, I'm also in favor of that.
Okay. So I'll just check back in with Mr. Grenke and Mr. Manhire. Just, it sounds like the 4 suggestions brought forward by Councillor McGuire have the support of Councillor. Do you have any note of caution or risk that we've not foreseen in going forward with these that you are ready to talk about tonight? Okay. Okay, no, that's important. I would really appreciate if you do have time to reflect between now and next week to know what, if there's some unforeseen circumstances here. Mr. Grenke?
Certainly, the bylaws, that's a welcome conversation, and as long as I've been with the town and working with and having the pleasure to work with the MHC, I think we're all in agreement for that. I think with this, it's a bit of a unique circumstance because ultimately the approval authority through all of this and the applicant is council, but certainly with respect to the old post office when it was a private applicant, it was a very collaborative process that worked very well, but I think it was an example there that really lent to the need to look at these bylaws. So the direction I'm hearing from council now is we simply proceed to a resolution to endorse the alteration subject to the points that have been agreed upon by council this evening, and we can bring that forward next week.
And we've added some others. Councillor McGuire, you want the last word on this?
Yeah, just in addition to thanking Carl, I'd like to thank one of our regulars in the gallery, Jenny Davis, a dedicated member of the committee, and she's been working on this, I guess, since it first came, and she stayed for the whole meeting to hear about it, so thank you, Jenny.
And what I'm just upon reflection of this discussion, if we had updated bylaws, and this is no fault, I'm not pointing blame, we may not be in this last minute kind of tweaking some of these final discussions, and we would be in better, as we get those in place, we'll be in better shape for phase 3, is what I'm hearing. So again, no fault. This is obviously a passion to a lot of people, and I think we've come to I provided staff with a recommendation, with advice tonight. Is there anything else you need from council on these? I'm assuming when we hear back next, as you incorporate these plans, if there's something that you need to flag to us, you'll bring that to our attention.
Yeah, I'll discuss with Director Manhire after following the meeting to make sure that we're on the same page.
Thank you. That was a very good discussion. We have no in-camera items. A motion to adjourn. Councillor Dwyer and Councillor Alfred, all in favor? Carried. Thank you.